I now have the pleasure to introduce our first group of speakers. Please join me in a warm welcome for Dr. Emerald Archer, Director of the Center for the Advancement of Women at Mount St. Mary's, Alicia Haridasani Gupta, a journalist at the New York Times covering politics, business, technology, health, and culture, Dr. McCullough Krishnan, a partner at the McKinsey Global Institute, Maria Prados, an economist at the Center for Economics and Social Research at USC, and our moderator, Maria Hinojosa, an anchor and executive producer for NPR's Latino USA. We are so delighted to have you all with us today. Thank you.
It's great to be with you. I'm joining you from your sister state of New York, but you know, we just follow in your footsteps. California is so deeply important to all of us. As a country, you are a model of so much that you have figured out how to work it out, how to engage, how to attempt to solve problems that the entire country will soon be facing. So thank you so much for this honor. So I was thinking, you know, obviously these are an extraordinary group of women that Emerald just introduced. Like, it's like, whoa, okay, these women are pretty incredible. And you've looked at the report, which, you know, one of the things that just leapt out at me, and I literally cannot get this piece of data out of my head, is how many young women will stop their education or will not further their education. And as a professor, you know, I'm thinking about all the students who I won't see, who I'll never get a chance to see. And I've seen it, my own students who had to go back to California because their parents were farm workers and they had to help supply the income. And these are students in the Ivy League. So I thought about asking each of you actually personally, how this has affected you. And maybe that can lead us into looking at some of the data and some of the broader issues that we can learn from this report on women in California. So actually, I actually want to start with you, Alicia, because you're a journalist and you're talking to people all the time. And also you're working from home and you've got a lot going on. And so, like, more on a personal side, when you think about you as a woman in this point in your career, how have you been impacted by this past year?
Thanks, Maria. I mean, I think I'm in the same boat as everyone else. It's really stressful. You know, before the pandemic, covering gender was sort of, you know, it's not considered like politics or economics. It was seen as a side thing. And this pandemic highlighted how gender undercuts all of those things, right? It kind of thrust me into the big stories that you would never have imagined have a gender angle, right? Like data collection and all of that. So it's kind of, it's been a very steep learning curve for me to quickly, you know, scramble and figure out like what everyone is asking. You know, what does this mean for women? What does this mean going forward? And I'm just sort of speaking to, like you said, I'm speaking to people every day and trying to make sense of these trends. And we can come back to that later, but just on a personal level, it's been a learning curve.
And so how are you doing when you think about how, because you're right. I mean, a pandemic like this has transformed your career, but also you're working from home, you know, so on a daily, you know, how have you thought about how this has impacted you as a woman who's a working journalist?
It's made clear what everyone is feeling, that women, no matter how empowered you are, no matter how successful you are, no matter how, you know, what your job title is, you're the one who's going to do the laundry. And you're the one doing the dishes at the end of the night. I think everyone has that realization of like, you know, I've spoken to CEOs who say, I'm running a business and here I am, you know, cooking oatmeal for my kid. So it's this weird juxtaposition of the life that's really come into clear focus.
I had a protest movement on Sunday. I just said, I'm not going to do this. I'm just not going to do the laundry. I'm just not. I kind of put my foot down, and my husband was like, okay, well then, and I was like, I'll leave it in the hallway, which is what I started doing. So I think that we could have a whole movement conversation about that. Mikola, tell us a little bit about how you're at McKinsey. It couldn't get more high intensity than McKinsey. And you're looking at the data. But again, I think you're an immigrant yourself, like me. So a whole other added element. How are you kind of personally doing as a professional woman, but a more personal, we'll get to the data in a second, but you personally, how are you kind of faring and seeing your work in yourself in the pandemic?
Yeah, I think maybe pivoting a little bit to the glass half full, not that I'm feeling a glass half full, but I do feel like what this moment has taught me is this sense of being at a crossroads, and just highlighted a lot of dichotomy in my life. So on the one hand, it has been incredibly challenging for many reasons, right? Many of which Alicia alluded to and Marie, you spoke about as well. I think the double burden, managing work in the workplace, work in the home, has been hard for everyone, and I think women disproportionately. I think the pandemic has revealed a lot of issues with burnout, anxiety, mental health, sense of isolation, which I am experiencing, but I know many people are. I think to the point about me being an immigrant, what it has meant is that I haven't been able to, most of my family's in India for more than a year. I haven't been able to travel back to see them. So on the one hand, there have been a lot of downsides, a lot of struggles. I see my teams struggling with challenges of isolation. Many of my teams are young professionals that don't have family units around them. They spend many months in isolation just by themselves. So that's the downside. On the positive, just for me personally, I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. This has meant I've been here every night. I've been able to put her to bed every night. I've been able to have dinner with my family. I've cut out travel entirely from my day, so there's no commute. I think it has brought to light as well in the workplace the conversation about the fact that we're not all just workers in a workplace, right? We have family lives around us. So anyway, my hope in seeing the glass half full is, can we make the most of this moment and what it has taught us about flexibility, what it has taught us about the reality of us being whole human beings, and bring more of that into the world of work going forward. There's a lot that we still need to work through when it comes to that. I mean, done badly, it means that work pervades 24 hours of your life. But I think done well, there's also an opportunity here. And then I guess the final thing I will say is I do a lot of my research globally, not just focused on the US. And I have to acknowledge that I think I'm very privileged in this moment, right? I have a secure job. I have a steady income. There have been, thankfully, no health issues that anyone in my immediate family has experienced. So relative to a lot of what so many people have gone through, this moment has been easy for me.
I mean, I definitely gratitude. I mean, I've been really focusing on in this last like 10 years of my life, but now, because it was a year ago exactly that I got sick, deeply sick with COVID. And then what's more adorable, everybody, is that, I'm in my bedroom right now, which is sometimes converted studio. And it was so early on and we weren't sure if I actually had it or not, but I was very, very sick. We slept with a pillow between us. How adorable is that? It's not, it's horrible. He ended up getting it. We ended up both surviving, but I've lost family members. So I agree with you. There's a sense where we can actually be really focused on gratitude in our lives. And I think as women, actually, it's kind of central. Emerald, what about you? How has it been on a more personal side for you?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for asking. I think, I gave birth to my daughter in October 2019. So I have not experienced motherhood outside of the pandemic experience, right? We were quickly ushered into life as we know it now. And I think the report, highlights a lot of feelings of isolation that women are feeling particularly, but everyone is feeling too. And I think not having kind of those cohorts of other, young mothers and other, women who are going through that experience and navigating it at the same time has been a difficulty that I don't think I would have encountered otherwise, right? If we were living in normal times. So I am extremely privileged, right? Again, a secure job. I can work safely from home. I have been extremely lucky with the time I've been able to spend with my daughter since her birth. So I recognize all of that, but certainly there is an isolating feeling, right? When you're not going and seeing your family members all the time, you're not communing with your friends and kind of sharing best practices and thinking in these new transitional periods of our lives.
I feel that. All right. Maria Tocaya, as we say in Mexican Spanish, namesake. When we had our pre-meeting, Maria was the only one, of course, she's an economist. And Maria was the only one who was like, it doesn't look so good. It doesn't look so good. So I'm wondering, Maria, yes, you're an economist, you're kind of reality-based, but on a personal level, how are you doing?
Well, yeah, thanks for remembering that. So on a personal level, as you know, other panelists have said, we all have these mixed experiences. So similar to Emerald, I also had like a crash landing into motherhood. My son, my only son, was born in December 2019. So that also meant that I was with a newborn when the pandemic, unfolded, and it felt very, strange and stressful, and you don't know what you're doing, and on top of everything you have this pandemic thing. So on a personal level, I feel that being able to spend time with my son and being able to keep my job and to not have to worry about going outside and all those things that were very stressful at that time were, of course, huge benefits of this. Again, I have a job where I can do my work from home when I have time. That meant that I am sleeping less. I'm doing less activities outside of the home. I'm not speaking to anyone that's not my husband or my son, almost. So this life is not normal. But it's like the price we are paying to raise our son in this way. He's super happy, so that has been like the great benefit from this. And from a professional point of view, it has been very challenging, right? Trying to do everything. Well, I had a plan to do everything before the pandemic, right? I had a plan to have childcare for my son and how I would deal with work and with commute and working from home, and all of those plans kind of unraveled suddenly with this. And so now I've been trying to do everything and make everything work. And from a professional point of view, it has been very challenging because we see this big disparity in terms of time demands for those who have, depending on their personal situation at home, if they have, caring demands for their children or family members, and they couldn't, have access to others helping, versus people who have maybe devoted themselves to work as a way to fight the stress and the anxiety that the pandemic brought on. So when you are in a profession that relies heavily on your own efforts and you need to devote more time to that, you start to see this divergence, right? And we were all very stressed because you can't catch up with people who are, maybe they're not very happy because they're isolated, but they have a lot of time to undertake new hobbies and do a lot of work. And so it has been a very mixed experience. There have been, many ups and downs, and I think it's been, yes, a learning process, but I'm not sure how we will move on from here.
I just want to say you also just held it together and spoke completely eloquently with your baby screaming in the back. So
can I add to that?
Sure.
So I think, going around, everyone is kind of talking about, yes, I'm very grateful, I'm safe, and I have the privilege of working from home, and yet I feel this isolation. And I think that's part of the problem, that we're not giving ourselves that space to mourn. I mean, yes, there are deaths and there are COVID cases, which are far worse. That life is far worse, and we have to mourn that too. But we have to also mourn the normalcy, right? We have to mourn the fact that raising a kid takes a village, and we don't have a village right now. We have to be able to be to sort of face our mental health challenges and recognize them, because that's part of the problem.
Okay, I love that, because I think you just kind of have to name things. And if there is something that we might be able to learn from this experience and actually making the data more personal. So to take what you just said, Alicia, which thank you for saying that. Yes. I mean, I don't even, I'm upset because, you know, I'm much older than many of you. And I'm just like, this just took a year or two out of like, what's supposed to be the best time in my life. Okay. So I think we have to name these things. Like, for example, I just was very public about getting a vaccine. A year ago, I had COVID. I've lost family members and friends. And to acknowledge vaccine apprehension, for example. Yeah, I was apprehensive. I'm terrified of getting the second shot. I don't want to get sick. Like just naming things. And I think that you pointing this out and giving us a space as women to think about what we've lost. So the thing that stood out for me in the data, again, I told you, was this point of data of how many young women and women are going to cut their education short. How many, 2.5 million women who have left the workforce as a result of the pandemic. This, not a recession, but a she-cession. So when you start thinking about the trickle down or, you know, ripple effects, I mean, which one of you wants to take this in terms of it's going to be bad for a while, but we're going to recuperate, or it's going to be bad for a long time? Because again, I think we are in a place where we can recognize our privilege. And so I'm trying to see how we understand that greater impact that this kind of data could have on our lives. And I'll just open it up to whoever wants to jump in.
Well, I can start with some of that. So I think this is very concerning because there are different effects that compound on each other about what happened. So you call it a she-cession, as you know, it has been called like that because usually recessions impact sectors that are mostly, you know, male dominated. This recession, on the contrary, impacted like the service sector, like, you know, hospitality and leisure, which are sectors that have a lot of female employees. So that was bad for women in the workplace. And you may think that some of those jobs may come back, you know, as the economy recovers, as society goes back to some kind of normal. Some of those jobs are going to be made available again. Some of those jobs are going to be different. But what happens here is that those women who left the workforce, they also had to take care of their kids. And so, you know, this recession introduced an additional disparity between especially mothers and fathers in that sense, because mothers have been bearing most of the burden of the additional time demands for childcare. And so that means that, you know, these mothers have had to put their careers on hold to some extent, regardless of whether or not they lost their jobs. So we see this even in mothers who kept their jobs. They have not been able to do as much as they wanted in their jobs in many cases, right? Like you have too many demands. And so when we recover, this feature is going to make it more difficult for some women to try to get back their, you know, the jobs they lost or the type of career that they had planned for themselves. And we know that for women, unfortunately, you all know all about the gender wage gap that exists. We know that there's like a child penalty for women. So, you know, wages on average are lower for women with kids. And on top of that, wages on average are lower for women who disrupt their careers. And that penalty is larger for women than men. So whenever you see this you know, chunks in the employment history of women, this is going to be detrimental for them. So that's why I think this situation is not easy to resolve, even when we think of going back to the way things were or to something similar to that.
So which piece of data, Michaela, were you kind of most impressed by? What's the thing that's kind of I mean, you've got data, you live with it all the time, but from this particular report, in terms of women in California, what's the piece of data that you're just like,
I think it has to do with just building on what Maria said, right? the multifaceted nature of this problem for women. And you see that in the data on women leaving the workforce. You see that related to how women think about education. You see that in trends with returning to the workforce. So the way I think about this problem is there are 3 or 4 issues going on that especially affect women disproportionately. The first is as we think about the job losses. And as Maria said, a lot of the job losses we've seen are in sectors that women tend to work in. And so as part of that, they've disproportionately experienced job losses. However, what our research would suggest is that women have experienced job losses above and beyond what can be explained by which sectors they work in alone. So there's something else going on. We did some work back in July, which said that women had made up about 39% of the workforce pre-pandemic. So this was back in July, before even a lot of the extreme effects were seen. But even back then, women made up about 39% of the workforce. They accounted for 54% of job losses. And only about a quarter of that was explained by the sectors that they worked in. So there was something else going on. I worry about the job losses. The second thing I worry about is the experiences of women when they're in the workforce, right? So we've talked about issues around managing childcare, managing household responsibilities, mental health issues. We've done surveys that have covered about 10 different countries. So this is not just a US issue, but covering about 10 different emerging markets, developed countries, and across the board, women disproportionately report challenges relative to men, and they disproportionately report challenges related to mental health and isolation, managing household responsibilities, feelings of burnout and anxiety. So even the experiences of women in the workforce are disproportionately worse. And we found that about 1 in 4 women are thinking about downshifting their careers in some way as a result, not asking for that next promotion, thinking about leaving the workforce, going part-time, right? So this has real impacts then as you think about the wage gap. So that's the second thing I worry about. The third thing I worry about is then getting back into the workforce, right? We know that labor market stickiness, to use a little bit of a wonky term, is harder for women than it is for men. So once they leave the workforce, getting back in is going to be more challenging. The workforce has moved on. They may have smaller networks, so finding a job is harder. So for various reasons, getting back in is going to be more challenging. And then finally, the thing we haven't talked about yet is what's happening with the future of work, right? So what companies have done in the last year is accelerate trends to do with automation, to do with digitization. Things that we thought would take 5-10 years to do have essentially happened overnight. And I worry about that for women, right? Because what this new future of work is going to require is it's going to require new forms of skills. It's going to require working more with technology. It's going to require changing what you do in the workplace. And in a world where women already faced a variety of barriers in the world of work, the future of work is only going to create more challenges. So there's a lot of things that I think are concerning about this moment. We could talk a little bit later about the things that are silver linings of this moment if we make the most of them. But there are many, many different aspects of women's lives in the home and women's lives in the workplace that make this moment especially difficult.
I love the fact that the silver linings for many of us have been like, well, I'm home. Like I see my family every single night. I mean, when this is the longest time that I have gone in my life without being on an airplane. It's just something extraordinary. And I think the reintegration of it is going to be a bit of a challenge. So Emerald, one of the things that that came out in this report is this notion that women are essentially reconsidering career advancement kind of in general, which is very, very interesting. What does it mean then for mid-career women? Again, for someone like me, I'm like, oh my God, time is running out. I have so much more to do. Oh my God, I've got so much more to do, but there is another impact for mid-career women and women who are just like, I'm, not gonna do the rat race right now.
Yeah, I think our panelists have said a lot, right, in this vein. And 60% of women are questioning whether they want to advance in their careers. That's huge and has huge implications for women's leadership, right, in corporate sector, in education, wherever they are. If women aren't at the table, right, because they've done the calculus, right, they've done the analysis that I can't bear 2 full-time jobs, right? My profession and unpaid domestic labor and keeping up, with your home and all of that and childcare. They're making really tough choices if they can't do both, right? So we know that women are not getting praise as when we compare them to men in equal numbers. We know they're not getting raises during this period. We know that they're not getting more opportunity to lead in their companies. And this is almost by 2 and 3-fold, right, we're talking about. So when women are living this reality, they're really kind of asking themselves, is it worth it, right? Is all of this hustle worth it to maintain my profession and to do what now is required of us at work from working from home, right? Doing the late night calls, having the long meetings that does not comport with making sure your child can do online schooling, right? That doesn't work. So I think if women start dropping out of the leadership ranks of their companies, who is going to represent us at those tables, right? If we're not there, we're not able to build better policy, right? We're not able to kind of put a light on the blind spots of our companies. So I think this has real downstream effects, and we need to make sure that we have initiatives in place to catch those women who would have gone on to leadership opportunities during this pandemic period.
So McKinsey has issued a report focused on women in the workplace, and it says that the pandemic could set women back 5 years. McKinsey doesn't play, Michaela. They don't play. So this notion of women being set back 5 years, I mean, you're still sleeping, which means that you've been. But this is a piece of data that, when you think about the impact that we are just kind of the uphill that we were getting to and the progress that we had made, this actually does set us back. What does that look like? You are on mute. Unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Yeah, absolutely. I think this goes back to the point that I was saying about 1 in 4 women. So think about us, we're 5 people on this panel, so at least one of us is considering downshifting their career in some way, right? So what does that look like? It means working fewer hours, going part-time. It means progress. If we look at the last 5 years of data in corporate America, some of our surveys suggest that women have expanded their ranks in leadership positions, to some degree in middle management, less at that first promotion, but there has been progress through the corporate pipeline, and we stand losing all of that. Everything that we've gained over the last 5 years could essentially be lost overnight if that 1 in 4 number actually follows through. And so what this means is the need for real concerted attention right now on the part of companies to take notice of this. I will say that our surveys also suggest companies do recognize this challenge. We surveyed companies, about 1,000 companies across the world, and we find that 9 out of 10 have done something to change their diversity, equity, and inclusion policies for this moment to deal with the challenges we're experiencing in this moment. But then when we survey employees, only 1 in 6 of them feel more supported as a result. So on the one hand, companies are raising the bar, but on the other hand, the challenge of this moment is so acute. We really need to rethink our corporate work policies. We really need to rethink the way we're supporting women in the workplace.
Okay,
Can I
so
add something to that?
yeah, absolutely.
And I have more to add too.
Yeah, and as you're adding to that, think about this. We understand that women of color, immigrants, that they, Black women, that they are really at a much greater loss. So as you're answering these questions, can you think about also how we address that dire need and how the impact on our country if we don't?
Well, yeah, what I had to say was more general than that, even though it's true that subgroups have even suffered more. But I think it's really important for us to recognize as a society how we value the role of women and what we think the role of women is. And it has been brought up that, yeah, firms may do things differently, and governments could implement different policies. And this all comes down to making women in the workforce feel that, yes, their worth is valued, so that you don't have employers who pay less to women because they have to provide them with some benefits, like policies like that. They have to take into account employers' incentives, right? So
all of the players in society have to maybe change their mindsets about what's expected of women. It's not our only burden to set the foot down and say, well, I prioritize my career, right? It's husbands' roles too, to realize that their women's, careers are not a secondary thing and not a hobby, right? It's not the same for them to work as to do childcare or take care of the home. So as we need to coordinate all of our expectations, I think, as a society, because for now, we have seen that women have made, huge progress in the workforce for many decades, but we still see that part of that progress is being impeded by this, cultural norms that we have in terms of our roles, and that's embedded in our minds of everyone in this society. And so I think that's crucial to address these issues.
Okay, Alicia and then Emerald.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So this, it's just, let's cast our mind back to like January 2020. And I wrote an article for the New York Times evaluating how California's corporate board quota was working. A lot of women were being assigned to boards for the first time, and it was great progress. And the reason they were able to do that was not because they were picking from a small pool of women who were already on boards, but because they had extended that pipeline and they were looking sort of middle management for women who were board ready. So now what happens to that pipeline? Right? Like we just literally a year ago, we were celebrating that pipeline, and now that pipeline might not even exist. That's the whiplash here. It's really immense. But I want to also look at sort of, we're looking at corporate culture, but I want to look at the low wage workers that were, you mentioned women of color and Black women. That's the front lines are disproportionately women of color and Black women, the grocery store workers, the pharmacy workers, the hospital workers, the caregivers, they're all women of color and Black women. And so in large portion. And so, we have to think about one of the biggest things that I'm hearing in terms of policy shifts is that Congress and White House are considering, national paid family leave and medical leave programs. And really strengthening the childcare infrastructure, because those are the women who need it most, right? Like 80% of the private sector workers still don't have access to paid leave. And just 8% of wage workers in the bottom quartile have access to paid leave. And who are those women? Those women are women of color and Black women, low wage workers. And so if they don't have the ability to take time off, then whose safety is that? That we're putting the burden on them to look after themselves and their family and everyone around them. Imagine being a restaurant worker right now with your mask on and someone demands you take your mask off. What are you supposed to do in that situation, right? And just from that perspective, if we think about what Congress, if Congress does implement this paid leave program, if Congress does implement, new childcare infrastructure, that will shift the workplace culture drastically. If we're looking forward, if we're thinking about what workplace will look like, American workplace culture will be completely changed by that.
There's actually a term, mask harassment, which is that restaurant workers are being harassed if they wear their mask, and that people who come in want to see their faces in order to tip them. And so it's this whole really strange thing that just feels so strange. And then I'm like, yes, but it's the United States of America in a pandemic, so I shouldn't be surprised. Emerald,
and what are those women supposed to do? They can't quit. They don't have another source of income. They don't have the safety to just quit.
Yeah, exactly. Emerald, you wanted to jump in.
It's been covered. So our conversation has covered it. Thank you for coming back.
Okay, so we have 3 minutes left. That's not a lot of time. And I guess we should think about where we can find glimmers of hope. I think that the mutual aid that I have seen is something really quite extraordinary. But I always am thinking about people who, like, for example, I've become obsessed. I live in New York City in Harlem. I've become obsessed with how empty our apartment building is. I think it's like half full. And we're just one building in Harlem. And I'm thinking about all of the other buildings around and who's left and who could never come back, who can't make it back, whose life, will be forever changed because of this. And then I find hope, right? I survived COVID. My husband survived COVID. I got the vaccine. So take us out in terms of just giving us a little bit of glimmer of hope. And let's start with you, Michaela. Tell us a little bit of glimmer of hope.
So I get hope from three things. The first is we are recognizing flexibility and the fact that people have lives outside of the workplace in a way that we've never recognized before. Right now, again, like I said, it comes with its own challenges where work can now become 24 hours of your life. But I think if done well, we can do something with this moment, right? We can redo the corporate workplace, redo corporate work culture. That's the first thing that gives me hope. The second thing that gives me hope is we're having this conversation for the first time, I think, yes, we've been having this conversation all along, but I really do feel like in this moment, men have experienced at least a fraction of what women have experienced in the past, right? We've seen data that says that, yes, mothers have disproportionately picked up the childcare burden, but fathers have also picked it up a little bit. So at least I feel like the aperture for the conversation has widened. There is a window now to be talking about this as a community, as a society. Alicia, you referred to, various acts in government. I think we're having this conversation now in a way we weren't having this conversation before. So that gives me hope. And then the third thing is we are going to be in a moment of reinventing society, right? There's going to be funding that's poured into the economy as we think about recovery. So we have the opportunity to channel all of that in very positive ways, whether it's thinking about childcare infrastructure, thinking about childcare as infrastructure, thinking about the digital economy and ensuring that women are part of the digital economy going forward, thinking about provision of skills training and ensuring that women are part of skills training programs. There's so much that we're going to be spending on. If we do that with a gender lens, I think there is an opportunity here. There's many, many reasons things could go wrong. But I think this also, when done right, this is a powerful moment in time.
All right. Well, we've got 1 minute left. So Maria, briefly, Alicia, and then I'll hand it back to Emerald.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, I think that the most hopeful thing from out of this is that we're having this conversation, but I think it will be important that this conversation transcends the gender category and that men participate of it too. And yes, men have experienced a little bit of what it is to have the responsibilities of childcare, but only, like a very small fraction of men, like 9% of working fathers have, uptaking that responsibility, whereas it's like 45% of women, of working women. And so it will be important to keep up this conversation and to keep the focus on mental health as well. Try to think of the health of our workforce coming back and to not make it like a women's issue, but it's like a women's issue. It's a workforce problem. So we need to keep the focus on that, I think.
Love that. Okay, Alicia.
So I'll share something that I heard that really shocked me the other day. There was a testimony in Congress on Equal Pay Day. And the executive director of the Commission for the State of Women in Hawaii was testifying. And part of her testimony was focused on women having leisure time and taking care of their mental health. And that just shocked me. And Hawaii is implementing a feminist economic recovery. Think about that. 2 years ago, would you ever have used feminist in Congress, the word feminist ever? I think that's we're at a turning point there.
I love that. Emerald, first of all, thank you to all the panelists, including Emerald. Emerald, your final thoughts, and then you're going to take it out, and I'll say goodbye, and I'll be back a little bit later.
Yeah, thank you. All of these glimmers of hope are right on. I think where I get my glimmer of hope is looking at the next generation, right? Looking at my students in the classroom and seeing how tenacious they are and how hungry they are for change. They are the smartest and I think best equipped to tackle gender equity issues. So along with this cohort, right, with us pushing, right, I know that the students across the country and particularly in California will continue to push for more. So that gives me a lot of hope. But I want to thank all of our panelists and thank you, Maria, for leading this discussion. It was excellent. I hope all of you at home have enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. We are in good hands, right, with this group of rock stars.